Hello and welcome. You're listening to TechInnovation Talks, powered by MJV, a brand new interview series where we will look to examine some of the most pressing questions in the world of tech and innovation. In less than 30 minutes, we will share with you ideas and concepts on some of the hottest innovation topics, inviting experts from our team and top guests from international companies to share their thoughts, experiences, and opinions. And to kick things off with a bang, I'm virtually flanked by a couple of exciting guests to talk all things business transformation. First up, from our in-house team, I'm delighted to introduce MJV's USA Head of Innovation, Rebecca Diaz. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm good. How are you, Paul?
Fantastic. Lovely to have you with us today. And for our external guest, I'm thrilled to say we are joined by Mr. Alexandre Carvalho. Alexandre is a marketing and innovation executive with international experience in B2B and B2C. Having previously worked at DuPont as their global director in product marketing, he currently holds the role of Global Innovation Director of Marketing at IFF. Hello, Alexandre. You are more than welcome.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here and nice to meet you all.
Fantastic. Okay, to start the ball rolling, let me fire off the first question to the both of you. Currently in business, there's a lot of talk about terms such as business transformation and digital transformation, words that have become so popular in the corporate vocabulary, but still represent broad things. In your opinions, what are the key touch points of business transformation? Alexandre, can I throw this one out to you first of all?
Yes, no, I think that's a great question. And when we talk about business transformation, I always think that one big thing, apart from looking at operations and business models and that traditional approach, nowadays, I think it's very important that we highlight the importance of really having your purpose really well articulated. How business transformation can also link to the big purpose of the company. Because we are living a world that ESG initiatives like sustainability and so on are becoming more and more important, for example. So I think business transformation can really connect to the bigger purpose of the company. So always asking the why you exist as a company, right? And how business transformation can help you that, apart from the efficiency, digital transformation, certification of your products and so on. But that's a reflection that I would like to make. Yeah.
Fantastic. Rebecca, anything to add?
No, I totally agree. I think it is about having a purpose. I think it's about a bigger transformation than before, when you would talk about change management, and maybe it was a small initiative. Like business transformation speaks about changing how the company thinks and then how that's reflected across the company. So it is about having consistent and systemic change. And the best way to drive that is through a vision or through a company shared purpose.
It's pretty hard to have any sort of conversation about transformation without talking about the pandemic and how companies around the globe have pushed to change, especially in the digital space, almost overnight in some cases. What has most surprised you or impressed you about the way that companies have adapted to this new scenario?
I think my experience now, post-pandemic and mainly during the pandemic, when you have a high dependence on face-to-face interactions with customers, like in the B2B space, that's very important because you're dealing with a new plant they're making, or a new product formulation, for example, in the case of the food space. So how do you do this in a digital way when you are used to do this face-to-face with people going to your site, to your labs, to your facilities to do tests and things like that, and doing this remotely? I think the word now, it's a bit of a buzz, but I always think about the phygital world, right? It's very important to do a hybrid model nowadays, because I took from 2 years ago, I used to fly to China, for example, for doing 1-hour meetings with customers. So, and this takes the whole week. Nowadays, we do 3-4 meetings with Asia in the same week, right? With different customers. So in a way, we don't have the energy of being face to face, but this transformation, I think, is going to stay because people realize that this is possible. Because in the past, people were like offended if you don't go in person, because it's your customer. They want the presence there. Is an important project. But now I think there is much more openness to this kind of way of working. And technology is going to play a crucial role. Running virtual events, partnering with companies like MJV, for example, for understanding those customer journeys could be a great way forward.
It's kind of ridiculous when you think about some of the old practices that companies used to employ, right? It really is shocking when you say those kind of things of traveling such a distance for just an hour. It's really surprising. To follow up on this, Rebecca, what would you consider the main risks consumer goods companies are facing when trying to transform themselves?
Well, I think in terms of consumer goods, and I think we also saw it through the pandemic, there's a twofold kind of way of reacting to all of these needs that happened through the pandemic. And one is that consumer behaviors are changing. Their lives have been impacted. When you're looking at fast-moving consumer goods, you also need to think about how those behaviors, motivations, and needs are changing, because it happens so quickly that all of your products, everything that you're doing, and even your way of interacting with them has to adapt to these new lives that they have that you're still trying to understand. So it's a very complicated. They don't know what they need. You still don't know what they need. And of course, the company doesn't know how to serve them. So there's a quick movement there of trying to figure out while the change is still happening. And additionally, you have the internal problem of your employees are also trying to adapt. They're trying to adapt to a new way of working, to a new way of communicating, and also to serve those needs in a quicker way. So you have your employees going personally through that transformation because they're also being impacted, but you also have them internally trying to solve problems in a better way. And you have your consumers changing. So of course, it brings a lot of complications to the whole process that I think can only be done by having a very in-depth look at those consumers and trying to really understand them and foresee what their needs are going to be. So not being reactive to those needs, but trying to be proactive and trying to understand them so that you're not always following their lead, but kind of guiding them through the needs that they will have. And the same thing internally. I think that's also the point of the transformation in most of the companies that we've been working with, is trying to prepare teams to adapt better, to be a step ahead in the process, and not always to be reactive, so that everyone can be better prepared for how quickly all those changes are coming, particularly in the consumer goods sector.
Sounds like it's a bit of a balancing act of not spending too much energy focusing on one thing and losing sight of other things. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Alexandre?
No, I think that's perfectly the case, right? Because it's very easy to move to the current new thing and the sexy things, let's say, right? And sometimes you lose the focus on your core business and the basics. So it's very important to have this kind of balance, right? Of transforming parts of the business and not putting our efforts only there, because I think you have a lot of activities that happen in the base business that you always need to watch out.
At the risk of sounding a little bit downbeat, let's dig a little deeper into the pandemic. During the pandemic, we've experienced market movements that we've never really seen before. Suddenly, for example, the sales points are closed, and we've seen companies break their rigid business structures and models and start offering direct-to-consumer options as a means of protecting their profits. From your B2B and B2C background, how do you see companies adapting to this? How can they become more fluid?
I think it's here to stay, right? We saw that the pandemic just accelerated a transformation that B2B, where I am at now, we're already preparing for, right? Because I think the future is really omni-channel, for example. And I think the pandemic accelerated that. You need to be the famous, you need to be your customer is nowadays, and not the other way around, right? In the past, you need to attract customers. Now you need to be with them. It's different because they're everywhere in different channels, so different ways to connect to them. So I think it's really here to stay, and more understanding how to connect to them in the B2B. The B2C, I think, started this earlier, but we see this acceleration big time in B2B, right? We see movements happening on industries that you could never imagine that will adopt like for example, e-commerce as a channel, and now this is happening today. So I think the other thing is about data, right? The beauty of this acceleration is that you can really understand what the behavior of your customers in a much better way if you leverage this idea of omni-channel. It's a huge transformation for legacy companies, but I think it's gonna, in the long term, it's gonna drive a lot of new opportunities. So I'm very excited to see all these acceleration, to be honest. Yeah.
Rebecca, is there a risk of companies moving too fast with this movement as well? Is there ever a case where companies can move too far forward too quickly?
Well, I think it is possible. I think, when you see a lot of startups trying out new things and being very experimental, and that works for them sometimes because of their like smaller size and smaller contact with people. When you have bigger companies, that want to kind of take on that mindset and innovate fast, they see themselves in a different perspective because they're global, and whatever they have will have a stronger impact. So you can't really like take that full aspect and try to adopt it, because there is a lot of risk if you don't do it right. But I think if you have the right thought process behind it, I think you incorporate testing, you bring in your consumers to the process, you try to kind of get some of that consumer data and perspectives and insights before, then I think that prepares you better for trying to do those changes in a bigger scale for companies that are in that size. So I think it's about really trying to have a process in place that helps you manage those risks ahead of time, so that you can still try to be innovative, try to still be reacting to the changes as quickly as you can at the scale that you are able to.
Sounds like companies need to do a little bit of self-reflecting to understand where they are in the market and how much they can gamble on any given project. Let me throw out a question to you with regards to maybe some of the mistakes and maybe lack of knowledge that some companies have had with relating to data. How have you seen companies struggle with data knowledge during the last couple of years?
The value of data has been understood much more recently. I think before, I think it has been increasing, and we all see it, and we see all these companies that can capture our data and are using it not only to improve their products, which I think it's maybe what was the perspective before, but really to improve the experience. And since experience is really making so much of a difference right now for products and services, I think that's where the data can really be leveraged. And I think a lot of companies might have overlooked that and are now trying to start creating relationships directly with consumers so that they can capture that data. Because as you pass that data, from one party to another, you start losing some of that value that can really become a differentiator in how you present yourself to your consumers, who in the end are the ones that make your whole system work. So I think, when you go through your partners to deliver a service, but don't have access to that information, it really, they've started to notice that it's something that can impact the service that they provide in itself. So they're trying to look for ways. And I think, we see it, we are impacted by it every day, not only in the business side, but as consumers, we see how that value of data is increasing, and how all companies are trying to find their way in and trying to start conversations directly with us to be able to capture that data. And I think that's a change that we've been seeing increasingly happen.
Alexandre, I saw you nodding as Rebecca was talking there. Is there any sort of tangible examples you can kind of share with us?
I think the big transformation, coming from I don't know, more than 20 years of experience, when still we are dealing with retail data on paper, printed with very old systems that you do everything manually, and you needed to make sense of all that. The companies always looked at data. The difference I see today in this transformation is real-time data, right? That can give you more predictive models than in the past. You were always looking at what happened months ago and then trying to predict what could happen. I think today, this is a major transformation. And I see that, for example, many mistakes we've done like starting things without understanding the current environment, looking at old data. Now, if we use like social sentiment or social listening, for example, it gives you more balance of, is this the right moment to launch a product? Because sometimes they fail because maybe it was not the right moment because consumers were worried about other things. So I had a chance to experience that in the past. And I think with new tools like today with real-time data, this helps you to get better accuracy or understanding better the moment that you are and have better decisions, right?
Change management has been known in the market for a long time. However, each year, technologies advance further and decisively influence business contexts, which has led to a growth pursuit of business transformation and a growing pursuit of business transformation. From 2019 to 2020, this context has changed and was further impacted by the extraordinary events that we've already discussed. How is business transformation evolving to respond to the demands of the current world status we live in? A world full of uncertainty.
So I think, and I mentioned this briefly before, when companies talk about change management, it usually meant one specific change. And of course, business transformation can have components of change management within that. So change management might be like changing a specific tool, changing a process, changing a bit of the structure. But when we talk about business transformation, it is about really changing the core way that the business works, how it looks at things, how it reacts to changes, and that purpose that it has and how it keeps that purpose going. So in this growing uncertainty and in a world of growing changes, it really, having the right mindset within a company of constantly pivoting and adapting however needed to achieve that purpose can make really a big difference, because it just means that you are, just like the world is in constant transformation, your company needs to be in constant transformation. So how do you create the right structure, the right mindset, and the right rituals, tools, processes, everything within your company, the right culture, so that it can be just as adept to changing as the external world is? So that's really what you're trying to build. You're trying to build a system that can adapt quickly, that can identify the right changes that are needed, that can prioritize, not only with the business in mind, but also with its employees and with its consumers. So it's kind of how you make that a kind of balancing act of what helps my business, what helps my consumers, what helps my employees, and what helps the world constantly as you react to the changes in the outside world. So it's not as simple, let's say, as we would have thought before, of like, oh, I just need to make this change and train this new area in adapting it. It really means we all have to be on our toes and be aware of how the changes are happening and how they're impacting us from all of the different points of view. So it's very complicated. I think it's not a simple task, and it's also not something that has a start or an end. It's a mindset that companies need to incorporate, and that as we keep learning more about the technologies that we have available to implement within companies can change. And also as the consumers become more and more fluent with different ways of technology, they are also changing. So we just have to be changing within companies as fast as consumers are changing outside. We can't have a strong structure that is not willing to make that change, because those companies will not be able to survive.
I think one point I would like to add from Rebecca is that leadership will always need to be on board. I had some good or bad experiences in the past on business transformation projects and also digital transformation projects, that if you have everybody in the bottom, let's say, if you bring things bottom up, everybody very excited. But as you move up into the company, the risk taking goes down a lot. So we really need to be prepared for finding a lot of roadblocks. So it's very important to have on board, I think, the C-suite, the leadership, when it impacts the business, because you can face some big walls. I had a lot of experience and battle scars in that field, that projects that everybody's excited about and let's go for it. And when it hits top management or different levels in the organization, mainly the C-suite, the risk avoidance there is normally very high in the agenda. So it's when things can get complicated. So for me, is one big lesson I heard. How do you embark them in an early stage, even with quick wins and things like that, that you can show, okay, I did this in a small scale. How can I do more and more and more, and not start to craft things and then all of a sudden it comes as a surprise to the C-suite level.
Sounds like you've gone through some frustrating times with that side of things.
I was going to add to Alexandre's point. I think that's perfectly said. We've even internally at MJV, we've developed a business transformation framework that we use, and as an example for a lot of the projects that we do in this area. And we built it based on our experience, and it has kind of 4 key steps that repeat themselves. But the first one is that top to bottom mind, and so we've divided it in top to bottom and bottom to top, like where does this come from, and in mindsets and processes. And we start with saying, like, it needs to start with the right mindset from the leadership that then you can transmit to the rest of the company, and then bring the right processes for the company to engage with it. But then it has to go back to the leadership, and the leadership needs to reinforce that they are accepting that change and that they are okay with it. So we found ourselves in that kind of midpoint of saying, like, to employees, like, you need to think differently, you need to approach this in a different way. We want to be more agile, we want to be more human-centered. And then we go to the leadership and say, like, hey, remember that you told them that they need to think differently, that they need to be more agile, and that they need to be more human-centered, because it's very easy for both sides to get lost. So really, both sides are transforming, and they're trying to look at things differently, and they both need to be reminded of that value, and they need to reinforce each other. So they need to show the work, and then the leadership needs to be able to say, like, okay, this is different than what we usually do, but I'm okay because I know that this is what I'm asking you to do. So it has to be that balancing act of saying, we're not gonna achieve it on the first try. This is a constant change, but we are moving on the right direction. So there has to be that mindset from the leadership for sure.
When you talk about culture, I guess there's a place where companies sign off for things. We want to do this, we want to do this. But then there's the actual reality of the things happening. Is that something that is a big challenge to change? And how do you go about making those changes?
I think it's very hard to keep this consistency, right, on the long run, because it's very easy to get distracted by, okay, now we have a crisis, so we put all the focus into solving those short-term needs. I think companies that win today is that they have this clear roadmap, and they try to get discipline into delivering on those things, even with the distractions, which I've seen from my experience. It happens all the time, right? Now we have this new crisis, or we now have this problem, so we need to park that project. We need to park, but it's gonna come in just so if we park, we are gonna delay, and then it's gonna impact in 1 or 2 years. So that balance is very important, I think. And so having consistency and having this North Star, not perfectly, with some flexibility, of course, right? Because you need to change course as you need. But in a way, I think companies that are winning today, they have really a clear roadmap, and they execute really, really with perfection for the big innovation companies. Like I see this in the tech industry happening. For example, which is a clear benchmark, I think, for legacy industries, for example, that I'm participating today.
Yeah, what you're saying about consistency, I think, makes a lot of sense. Rebecca, anything you want to add on this, making cultures stick?
Yeah, I think to make culture stick, I think you need to And that's not something all companies think about. You need to think of culture in a broader term. So, culture is not one thing. It's how all of these pieces come together. And that has to do a lot with your employees. So I think to drive the right culture and to build it in the right way, you have to make sure that you're also listening to what your employees are going through, what they're feeling, what were their expectations of the environment that they're in, so that you can kind of find that midpoint of what they are hoping for and what you want. And you can make that bridge of how to do it in the right way. Because if you try to build your culture, but that doesn't align, or you're not able to communicate in a way that connects with your employees, then that culture is not going to work. So it has to be, of course, aimed at your goals, but it has to take into consideration that all of your employees are bringing in a different part. They're part of different process. They bring their own identity to their work, and you have to incorporate that. So I think that's something that is super important to keep in mind when you're looking at this work related to the culture that you're trying to build.
And to add on that, I think Rebecca and Paul is about looking at what is strong in the culture, because change culture is very difficult, right? And I also talk from experience, right? One way that I found very interesting is when you leverage the good things of that culture and make it stronger, right, for the need you have. Because to change completely and come and say and try to boil the ocean, right, with, okay, let's change everything, it's very difficult. So leverage what is strong and the positives, and then the old habits will probably start changing by the time. But I found this very useful, right? If you want to bring a culture of innovation, for example, try to bring the examples where things work, and celebrate what was done great. How can you repeat more of that, right? And not just complain and say, okay, we need to change because we are not innovative. We've been doing the same things for many years. So if you bring the success cases, and celebrate what was done good, I found a very good way to get traction, and people get excited about it. And by the time, the culture might be changed, which is what you believe in the long run.
I agree with that. And I think it's about that idea of not making it only about a specific initiative or a specific goal. It's about saying, this is the mindset that we want to bring. Like, this is the mindset that is going to bring us in the right direction, and celebrate it at all of the different points. So not just focusing on a single initiative, because then if not everyone is part of that, then they didn't get a chance and they're not part of that culture. So you need to make sure that you're kind of highlighting the right things all over the place, so that people in all of the different areas feel that they are connecting to that. And to that point, I think also something that we try to bring, and that it's important when considering transformation, is to enable that North Star and that compass that you want to bring for your company. Sometimes it's better to think about it like, what are the principles of your transformation? What are those key things that you want to achieve that will get you closer to your goal? And those might be a little bit less tangible, but it can help if you communicate them right. It can help everyone say, like, oh, this is the direction. So it doesn't tell me exactly what I need to do, but it tells me like in which direction I'm going. So I know that if I'm doing any of these things, I'm moving towards the goals that the company has. And there you give more flexibility of people to try to discover and find their own way, because they know what those priorities are, not in terms of results, but in terms of way of working, of way of looking at things, of way of approaching things. And they can start to navigate it on their own, and you don't have to be in charge of doing the whole change, because you can find ways to motivate people to do it by themselves. So it's about how do you build it from the leadership, but also create the right pathways for the rest of the company to start involving themselves in their own way.
Alexandre, my last question for you today, a question regarding the data revolution we're currently living in. There is a kind of data-driven behavioral economy that provides insights into consumer and companies' leads. However, is it possible to see a huge amount of companies still struggling with this data analytics, an essential part of the bigger business intelligence process? What is the role this behavioral data plays in a quality functioning business model?
I think this is one of the single biggest transformation happening today, right? From marketers like me coming from the 90s, as I was mentioning before, that you could not understand. You work with customers in B2B and B2C in bulk, right? You try to segment them, and now you have the possibility to personalize your connection. You can even connect one to one if you want, right? So that's a big revolution. I think that's the transformation that delivering content in the right way. I come from the time that you create an advertising, and okay, if it goes well, great, you get promoted. If it doesn't go well, then things can get really complicated because it's done, you cannot change, and it goes on TV, and you believe in that target group that you analyzed, and then you just think that everything is going to go all right. So I think that transformation of mindset for people with experience for many years is a big mindset change coming from the last few years. Leveraging data, transforming, measuring ROI is also a dream of every marketer, I think, because in the past it was very hard to measure return on investment of your initiatives in the precise way that we can do. So in conversations with the team at MJV, for example, this is one of the big topics, right? On how to tackle and understand the customer journey, the touch points, how can we leverage, how can we measure, and it's not only about the technology. I think nowadays, from my experience, technology is the easy part, but building the right processes, the right analytics that will drive the business in the right way with the proper investment is key here, right? Because nowadays I think technology is becoming much easier to access than in the past, but I think people becomes the big part of this transformation as well.
You paint quite a scary picture of taking on new initiatives in the 90s.
Yeah, it's different times. Nowadays, I think we have much more tools. In the past, we're very limited, right? So it was always a big bet, and it was always a silver bullet, right? You need to find a silver bullet, and nowadays you can play with many different levers for making success. That's the beauty of all this transformation as well.
Rebecca, let me ask you this last question on this first ever Tech Innovation Talk. So I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. As features such as data engineering and automation processes become increasingly essential for customers, there's a greater appreciation of what is teamed or termed user-centric or human-centric. Is it possible to get the best out of both worlds?
The way to take the most advantage of any is to integrate them. I don't know if that makes sense, but to really be able to take advantage of data, you need to bring people into it. You need to understand the behaviors behind that data, because data by itself is not going to tell you what you need to know. And a user-centric perspective can bring you the right motivation, some needs, but to also be able to scale that, you need to understand, data can help you understand to what scale those needs exist and how to best complement both. So I think there is a space there for a kind of design-driven data science. We're seeing companies start looking to bring data related to people within their companies, to bring it to HR, to try to, in places where they had only looked at more of that personal perspective, they're trying to bring data. And in the places where they were only gathering data, they're trying to bring in that people perspective. Because you need both in order to drive solutions that are really going to be valuable and that will really make a company understand the worth of investing on it. So I think the only way forward is to find a way to integrate both, because by themselves, I think they run a little short, and they can leverage each other very nicely if done well together.
Yeah, no, I like particular this idea of integrating, right? Because that's another side effect of the technology. As you start building apps and start buying more tech stack, let's say, it starts to pile up. And then sometimes the systems, they don't talk to each other. And I think that's a big challenge when in this. How do you integrate for everything to be automatized, or things that to be smooth for getting this understanding and the great insights that you can leverage from data and from the tech stack that you're building. I really like that idea. That integrating is really key going forward.
Perfect. Beautiful. Well, I think that's a nice sort of way to end our first ever talk today. So first up, thank you to both Rebecca and Alexandre. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is the first ever Tech Innovation Talks. And we want to say thank you to you, wherever you may be consuming this and watching this. And if you are thinking to yourself, okay, I like what I'm hearing, I want to hear more from the likes of Rebecca, please do join us on the 10th of November, 11:30 Eastern Time, where the wonderful Rebecca Diaz will be our key speaker, and we will talk more on the subject of digital transformation with our webinar, Design Thinking, Innovation at the Core of Business Transformation. But that's it for the first of many. This is Paul Sieff Duarte signing off for Tech Innovation Talks, powered by MJV. Take care, and we'll see you soon.